You've seen it. You've quoted it. You've probably laughed so hard you cried. Blazing Saddles *, Mel Brooks' 1974 masterpiece, isn't just a movie, it's a comedy institution. It's the film that took the classic American Western, threw it in a blender with racial satire, slapstick, and a whole lot of nerve, and hit puree. For over 50 years, it's been hailed as one of the most audacious, gut-busting comedies ever made. It blew the doors off Hollywood, smashed every rule in the book, and gave us a hero in Sheriff Bart, the impossibly smooth, cool-headed lawman in a town drowning in its own stupidity. But what if I told you the chaos on screen was nothing compared to the madness behind the camera? What if the film you know and love was born from drunken fistfights, last-second casting catastrophes, and a studio so terrified they wanted to bury the movie and pretend it never happened? This iconic comedy is packed with bizarre secrets the studio never wanted you to know. From a star who literally collapsed on his first day to the strange truth behind its most infamous scene, we're about to expose the wildest, weirdest, and most unbelievable stories from the set of Blazing Saddles. So saddle up, because this ride gets rough, fast. The story of Blazing Saddles is the story of a film that, by all accounts, should have never existed. It was such a huge, controversial gamble that its own studio was its biggest enemy. The executives at Warner Brothers watched the first cut in dead silence, absolutely horrified. They saw the racial slurs, the relentless mockery of authority, the infamous campfire scene, and they saw their careers flashing before their eyes. Their plan? Kill the movie. Let it die a quiet death. But Mel Brooks, armed with a contract that gave him final cut, refused. He forced a public screening, and for the first 20 minutes, silence. Utter, deafening silence. The execs were sweating, convinced they had a historic flop on their hands. And then, Mongo knocks a horse out cold. The theater didn't just laugh, it erupted. That eruption would go on to earn nearly $120 million on a tiny $2.6 million budget, becoming a cultural phenomenon. But to get there, Mel Brooks and his crew had to survive a production that was just as chaotic, offensive, and ridiculously funny as the film itself. Every great movie has its what-if casting stories, but Blazing Saddles has one of the most bizarre and tragic in Hollywood history. The role of the Waco Kid, the washed-up, silver-tongued gunslinger with the fastest hands and the shakiest grip, is now inseparable from Gene Wilder. His portrayal is iconic, a perfect blend of weary sadness and lightning-fast comedic timing. But Gene Wilder wasn't the first choice. He wasn't even the second or third. In fact, Mel Brooks was dead set against casting him. Brooks first went to the biggest Western star on the planet, John Wayne. Brooks found the Duke in the Warner Brothers commissary, handed him the script, and held his breath. Wayne came back the next day and said, "I can't do this. This is too dirty. But man, I'm gonna be the first one online to see this movie." After being turned down by Dan Daly, Brooks landed on an Oscar-winning actor named Gig Young. Young was known for playing weary alcoholics, and Brooks thought he was perfect. The studio agreed. Young looked the part, he had the prestige, and he was hired. This was a classic case of art imitating life, but in the most dangerous way possible. Young had a well-known, real-life struggle with alcoholism. The first day of shooting arrived. The scene was the jail cell where Sheriff Bart first meets the Waco Kid, who is hanging upside down from a bunk, drunk. They draped Gig Young over the bunk, the cameras rolled, and he began his lines. He started shaking. At first, Mel Brooks was thrilled. He whispered to his crew, "This guy's giving me a lot. He's giving me the old Alky shake. Great." Brooks thought he was witnessing a brilliant piece of method acting, but he was wrong. The shaking didn't stop. It grew more violent. Then, as the crew watched in horror, green bile started spewing from the actor's mouth. He started screaming. This wasn't a performance. Gig Young was suffering a severe, life-threatening episode from alcohol withdrawal. An ambulance was called, and he was rushed to the hospital. Just hours into the first day, production shut down. Mel Brooks was in a panic. He had no star and was losing tens of thousands of dollars a day. He made one frantic phone call to the very man he had originally rejected, Gene Wilder. Wilder dropped everything, got on the next plane to Los Angeles, and was on set, in costume, almost immediately. The on-screen chemistry between Cleavon Little and Gene Wilder became the heart of the film, a legendary pairing that almost never happened. It was a miracle born from a disaster that saved the movie and created one of the most beloved characters in comedy history. The soul of Blazing Saddles wasn't just forged on a chaotic set, it was born in a writer's room that was, by all accounts, even crazier. Mel Brooks described the process bluntly. Blazing Saddles was more or less written in the middle of a drunken fistfight. The original idea came from a writer named Andrew Bergman, who had written a treatment called Tex X, a nod to Malcolm X. Mel Brooks bought the rights, loved the core concept, and assembled a team of killers to write it. Brooks felt he was washed up and surrounded himself with writers who were, as one biographer put it, either untested or on the skids. And at the center of this creative storm was the one person the studio feared more than anyone, Richard Pryor. Pryor was not yet the global superstar he would become. He was a brilliant but controversial stand-up comic known for his raw, unflinching comedy about race in America. The studio executives were terrified of him. But Brooks knew he needed Pryor's voice. He knew that for a movie satirizing racism, he needed one of the sharpest minds on the subject. As Brooks would later say, "I can't say the N-word. I need him, he has to bless it." The writing process was, as one writer described it, insane. It was a mix of Jewish comedy writers and Pryor, and the creative energy was explosive. Pryor, often fueled by cognac and cocaine, would act out scenes, bringing a performer's energy to the writing. He was particularly obsessed with Mongo, the hulking brute played by Alex Karras. It was Pryor who came up with some of Mongo's most brilliantly stupid lines, like "Mongo only pawn in game of life." Of course, Mel Brooks' original plan was for Richard Pryor to not just co-write the film, but to star in it as Sheriff Bart. To Brooks, it was a no-brainer. The part was written with Pryor's rhythm and intelligence. But the studio, Warner Brothers, flatly refused, claiming Pryor was uninsurable due to his drug arrests and unpredictable behavior. Brooks fought for him, but they wouldn't budge. The role ultimately went to the brilliant Cleavon Little, a Tony-winning stage actor who brought a suave, unflappable coolness to the part. Little made the role his own, but he faced his own ugly battles, enduring a constant barrage of racial slurs on set to make the film. It was a performance of immense bravery, both on and off screen. So Richard Pryor, the man whose voice is arguably the engine of the entire film, was relegated to a writer's credit. He never got to wear the sheriff's badge, but his fingerprints are all over every boundary-pushing scene that made the studio break out in a cold sweat. There are moments in cinema so iconic, they transcend their films. The shower scene in Psycho. I Am Your Father, in The Empire Strikes Back. And then, there's the campfire scene in Blazing Saddles. It is, without exaggeration, one of the most influential moments in comedy history. It was the first time in a major Hollywood film an entire scene was dedicated to the glorious sound of passing gas. Today, it seems like a juvenile, if hilarious, gag. But in 1974, it was an act of cinematic rebellion. Brooks was directly mocking a tired Western cliché, cowboys around a fire, eating beans from tin plates. Brooks saw that cliché and decided to detonate it. A friend told him, "If you are going up to the bell, you better ring it." And ring it, he did. The scene is a masterclass in comedic timing, building from a single sound into a full-blown symphony of flatulence. But the weirdest part isn't what you see, it's how those sounds were made. Those aren't real farts. Mel Brooks and his sound team created every single one by hand. The primary technique? Sticking their armpits into a cupped hand and making noises. They meticulously crafted a rich, varied soundscape of flatulence. This scene was a major point of contention with the studio. The executives were appalled and pleaded with Brooks to cut it. Of course, Brooks refused. When the film was released, the scene became legendary. People howled. When Blazing Saddles * was sold to television, the scene became a headache for censors. In one bizarre edit, some TV versions cut the fart sounds entirely, leaving the visuals. Audiences saw the surreal image of a dozen cowboys writhing and groaning for no apparent reason. The campfire scene wasn't just a joke, it was a statement. It was Mel Brooks announcing that in his movie, nothing was sacred. He rang the bell, and the sound echoed through comedy history forever. Mel Brooks loves to embed his films with layers of humor, especially jokes that nod to his Jewish heritage. In Blazing Saddles, he delivered one of his most audacious gags, a flashback where a tribe of Native Americans, led by Brooks himself, speaks perfect, fluent Yiddish. In a film set in the American West of 1874, the last thing you expect to hear is a language more at home in a Brooklyn deli. The chief, played by Brooks, grants passage to Sheriff Bart's family, turning to his tribe and saying in flawless Yiddish that they should let the black family pass. The joke is so out of left field that for many viewers, it just registers as hilariously random, but there's a sharper satirical point. The joke is a direct attack on the historical laziness of Hollywood itself. For decades, Westerns portrayed Native Americans as monolithic caricatures, often played by white actors speaking a simplistic, made-up language. By having his characters speak Yiddish, Brooks was exposing that hypocrisy brilliantly. He was essentially saying, if you're not going to bother with historical or cultural accuracy, then why not this? It's just as ridiculous as what you've been doing for 50 years. It's a joke that operates on two levels. For some, it's a weird non sequitur, but for others, it's a scathing critique of a whole genre's lazy history. Of course, this was purely Mel Brooks. Studio executives, already nervous, would likely have seen this as an esoteric joke that would fly over most of the audience's heads. But Brooks understood the power of such a specific, pointed gag. It was a secret handshake to the audience, signaling this wasn't just any Western. If the campfire scene declared war on good taste, the ending declared war on cinema itself. It remains one of the most audacious and brilliantly meta endings in movie history. Just as the film's climactic brawl reaches its peak, the fight literally breaks through the wall of the set. Suddenly, the characters are on the Warner Brothers studio backlit in 1974. The brawl spills onto the set of a flamboyant musical, led by a director played by Dom DeLuise. Cowboys start fighting with chorus boys in top hats and tails. The carefully constructed reality of the film completely shatters. This was a complete deconstruction of filmmaking. Mel Brooks loved to break the fourth wall. If a joke worked, it didn't matter if it broke the story's reality. And this was the ultimate reality-breaking joke. The studio executives, predictably, hated it. They called it too insane and a waste of time. But Brooks, protected by his final cut provision, refused to change a frame. The chaos escalates from there. Hedley Lamar flees in a taxi to Grauman's Chinese Theater to watch the premiere of Blazing Saddles. Sheriff Bart pursues him, finds him in the audience, and shoots him. Bart then strolls into the theater with the Waco Kid to watch the end of their own movie. They watch themselves on screen, preparing to ride off into the sunset, but Brooks gives the cliché one last twist. As the on-screen Bart and Jim ride away, the camera stays on the real Bart and Jim in the theater. They leave, climb into a sleek, modern limousine, and are driven off into the night. This final gesture is one last reminder, none of this was real. It was all a movie, a satire designed to make you laugh at the absurdity of racism and the tired tropes of a genre he loved. The phrase, "you could never make that today," is thrown around constantly, and no film gets saddled with that label more than Blazing Saddles. With its non-stop barrage of racial slurs and jokes targeting practically everyone, it's easy to see why. Even Mel Brooks himself has said he doesn't think the film could be made today, specifically citing the widespread use of the N-word. The debate resurfaces online every few years. Some argue its satire is timeless and aimed squarely at making fun of racists, not minorities. They point out that the bigoted characters are always the butt of the joke, while Sheriff Bart is the smartest person on screen. Others argue that regardless of intent, the language is too offensive for a modern audience, but here's the weirdest part: the idea that Blazing Saddles is in danger of being cancelled is largely a myth. While films like Gone with the Wind have been temporarily pulled from streaming for re-evaluation, Blazing Saddles has remained largely untouched. There has been no significant, mainstream movement to censor or ban the film. In fact, defenders like Whoopi Goldberg have passionately argued that its comedy is brilliant and its target is prejudice itself. However, the film doesn't exist in a vacuum. HBO Max, for example, has added a contextual introduction hosted by film historian Jacqueline Stewart. Much like disclaimers on old cartoons, the intro doesn't censor the film but frames it, explaining that it uses racist language to critique bigotry. This approach acknowledges the controversial content without erasing the work. The ultimate irony is that the argument that Blazing Saddles couldn't be made today ignores that it could barely be made in 1974. It was incredibly controversial then. The only reason it exists in its unfiltered form is that Mel Brooks had final cut and the